Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and today we are talking about a fair bit of news for Nintendo Switch 2. We have several stories to discuss here that have some very interesting implications. One story that is telling us a little bit more about the Nintendo Switch 2 and its screen size, which is also further supporting the idea that Switch 2 will be coming on the year 2024, but then we have this other story that seems to be supporting this idea that Switch 2 will indeed be having colored buttons, very similar to the Super Famicom. And on top of that, we have an updated rumor that I think is coming from a pretty good place here that is suggesting even more so that we're going to be getting enhanced backwards compatibility. In other words, games on your Switch running on Switch 2 will look and run better, and this is going to be a big part of Nintendo's marketing plan for the console. And so it's all really exciting stuff in my opinion, and that's what we're delving into today. But before going forward, let me point out that we are aiming to reach 50,000 subscribers, perhaps by the time Nintendo Switch 2 does come out this year. So if you do enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Leaving a like is also super helpful, and enjoy the ride as we talk about Nintendo every day. So of these three stories, let's jump into this story of a bigger screen that's also seemingly supporting this idea of the console coming out in 2024. It's looking like we have even more evidence for this happening. So the story's coming from Takahashi Mochizuki from Bloomberg. He is writing that analyst Hiroshi Hayase is saying that Nintendo will be releasing a new game console this year with an 8-inch LCD screen. Now, so you understand, he may be an analyst, but this appears to be more than just a prediction. Here in the article it says, his research focuses on small and medium displays, and he bases annual forecasts on checks with companies in the supply chain. And so my basic understanding of this is that Hiroshi Hayase has an inside knowledge on what's going on with these different companies, including Sharp and Nintendo requesting displays for their next console. And so what's interesting about this, credit to something else on Twitter for pointing this out to me during our DM exchange. We're getting this article in the end of January, right? A similar article was written in the end of January back in 2016. We expect a small recovery in shipments of flat panel displays for game devices because of Nintendo's new game hardware expected to be released in 2016, said Hiroshi Hayase, a senior principal analyst at IHS Technology, part of IHS, at the firm's display forum held in Tokyo. And by the way, this article was also written by Takahashi Mochizuki. So, something to note here is that initially the NX, which was eventually confirmed to be the Nintendo Switch, was planned for 2016. And what we've come to understand is that the system was delayed to get the games ready, such as Breath of the Wild. But they were going to be ready to release the system holiday 2016. And actually, something very similar was also reported to be happening in 2021. Takahashi Mochizuki had written for Bloomberg that Nintendo was planning to release a Switch model with a bigger Samsung OLED display, and that did indeed happen later that year. So we have this history here of Mochizuki predicting the release for new Nintendo systems with new screen technology. So this is another article out there from a reputable place saying Switch 2 is planned for 2024. And we're getting word that it's going to have an LCD display that will be 8 inches in size. And so for comparison, the original Switch has a 6.2 inch screen. The OLED has a 7-inch screen. So this will be the biggest screen yet. And to me, that's very exciting. But there's a lot more to this. So we actually had initially heard rumors of this 8-inch LCD display from Nate DeHate a while back last year. And more recently, Necrofilipe from Universal Nintendo put out an updated spec sheet that included this 8-inch display, and he said it would be 1080p in resolution, not 720p, so that's a positive over the current screens we have for the Switch family. But OLED is, in general, considered to be better than LCD. The colors are better, it's more vibrant, the blacks are much more clear, and the contrast is just superior. And so a lot of people aren't happy about hearing that we're going to get an LCD display. And I'll actually point out, we had reports back in December that Nintendo's requesting next generation OLED panels for multiple IT devices. And so I was actually thinking, due to legal reasons, that Nintendo may be going back to Samsung to get OLED panels. And so we have reports of that, but it's not necessarily for Switch 2. And I actually had reached out to Necrofelipe a couple weeks ago, and I asked him about his updated specs and how it's an LCD that seems to go against the reports we heard from December. But during that conversation, Necrofelipe talked about that from what he's heard of current dev kits, it is indeed this 8-inch LCD display, and based off the specs he reported, 1080p resolution. And so the speculation is that these OLED panels that were requested by Nintendo in December could be for other Switch devices, perhaps just updates to the current Switch family, and maybe even in support of the idea of a smaller, cheaper revision for the Switch as well. We've seen Nintendo do this in the past. They did it back when the Wii U came out. They released the Nintendo Wii Mini in that same year, and also when the Switch came out back in 2017, Nintendo released the 2DS XL. So perhaps Nintendo releases maybe like a Switch Lite with an OLED panel, and it's a new, smaller, cheaper revision that lines up with some price drops that helps facilitate this transition to the next generation, and also helps to push Switch sales at the same time. Now, something I'll point out is that we don't know what type of LCD it is. LCD technology has improved over the years. Maybe this LCD we're going to see in Switch 2 will compare more favorably to the OLED panels we've seen, and because it's cheaper, it will facilitate a more accessible price point for a Switch 2. So with the improvement of LCD technology, it being a bigger 8-inch screen and being 1080p, I would consider that to be pretty good. So it looks like we're getting Switch 2 with this bigger screen, and the pattern of Takahashi Mochizuki and Hayase Hiroshi putting out this info seems to suggest that Switch 2 is probably coming out this year, as a variety of other reports and rumors have suggested. Now, before we move on to the next story here, it looks like we have an update to this current story. So, Takashi Mochizuki on Twitter said this: display shipment data suggests Nintendo would make 10 million plus of next-gen console in initial fiscal year, unlike PS5 and Xbox Series X and S that faced chip shortages at launch. Nintendo's would be much easier to find at stores. And about OLED version, Omdia says not for this year. So having systems more readily available, obviously, is good to hear. More of us will have a better chance to pick up the system soon. But also, it looks like the talk of Nintendo Switch 2 Pro has already begun. Basically, yeah, 2, 3, 4 years from now, we'll be talking about having a revision with an OLED panel. But we got more to talk about. So we've discussed several times in the past that there's been a variety of Nintendo games that have been releasing or announced in 2023, and some of which are coming out this year, like Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, that all of a sudden are using these different colored buttons for the overlay. And so my speculation has been is that this may indeed be the buttons for the Switch 2, and a lot of developers have already been briefed on this, and they are preparing for Switch 2, and there's a whole bunch of them, and because there's a whole bunch of them, just a few are slipping through the cracks, and we're seeing this very small piece of evidence in a few rare games. That's what I think is going on, because we haven't seen these colored buttons ever until the year of 2023. And now we have more information to support that this may be what Nintendo is indeed actually doing, and I'm not talking about more games, but actually, it's coming in Nintendo's promotional material. So I would like to credit Nintendo Leaks here because this is something that they spotted. I will link their video in the description below. If you're a Spanish speaker, they are a very good Nintendo news channel, so definitely check it out. But what they observed is that Nintendo of Hong Kong released a Nintendo Live Taipei 2023 video, and around the 18-second mark, where they're showing some promotional trailer for Nintendo Live, we can see a clip of the colored face buttons. Not the traditional face buttons we've seen for Switch, but the colored buttons that match the Super Famicom style, this style we've seen in some recent Switch games, that we think might be a hint at Switch 2. So if we're seeing this in the marketing material, that would suggest that Nintendo is marketing these colored buttons for something that's coming out this year of 2024, I would say. And just to be clear, I'm not saying this is a 100% certainty, but with games having a promotional material, I am definitely leaning in this direction. Of course, we'll see. But I think it should also be mentioned that while I think this could be for Switch 2, it is possible it may be for another revision. We did mention that with those OLED panels Nintendo has requested, and also the history of Nintendo releasing smaller, cheaper systems in the launch year for next generation systems, we may be seeing a revision, and perhaps this revision might have the colored buttons. When Nintendo released the new 3DS line, it had colored buttons very similar to the Super Famicom, so it could be that. But it also could be the Switch 2, or both. Regardless, it is interesting that we're now seeing this promotional material, further strengthening the idea that there's more to these colored buttons than just some random aberrations that just started popping up in 2023, even though the Switch has been out since 2017. But moving on to our next story here, we have a rumor coming from Nash Weedle. Now before I dive into the rumor, I want to bring up that we've discussed this enhanced backwards compatibility idea from Nash Weedle before. It was about a month ago, and so when I go back to this tweet from December 28th, in this part of the tweet when talking about an enhanced version of a Bayonetta trilogy coming to Switch 2, he also mentions, due to backward compatibility, it can also be played on Switch 2 with improvements. And so I interpreted this to mean that Switch 2 will have backwards compatibility, and not only will you be able to take your Switch games and put into your Switch 2, at least some of these games will run and look better. So imagine taking Mario Odyssey, a game that has a dynamic resolution, and all of a sudden, it no longer dips below 900p, it stays at a 900p all the time. And games, say, like Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, that don't have a steady frame rate on Switch 2, they would. And so it looks like that is indeed what Nash Weedle was getting at here, because yesterday he posted this. Now I'm reading the translation here, but it says, "It seems that a large part of the Switch 2 marketing campaign is to emphasize from the beginning and in a very persistent way how your games will look on the new console. They will give importance to the user's catalog, which jumps generations and elevates their experience." And so perhaps the big hook of Nintendo Switch 2 is just games looking and running better on the system. And so looking at this, he could just be referring to new Switch 2 games, but my interpretation, because he also refers to the importance of the user's catalog and elevating their experience, that he's also getting back to this idea of the enhanced backwards compatibility. And so considering that one of the biggest complaints about Nintendo Switch is how a lot of games don't run well, they have blurry resolutions, a lot of third-party games just aren't that great on the system, the Switch 2 may tout that they are going to be fantastic on the system. And this is something I'm thinking I'll probably dive even further into in a future video, but this has me thinking about Metroid Prime 4 and how we're expecting it to be a cross-generation title. If these enhanced experiences on Switch 2 is going to be a big part of the marketing of the console, having this Metroid Prime 4 cross-generation release and showing the improvements on Switch 2 could be key to their marketing here. But this could also tie into Tears of the Kingdom, Splatoon 3, maybe Pikmin 4 and Mario Wonder. And this has me excited. I am looking forward to this happening if it is indeed the case. It's a rumor, take it with a grain of salt. I personally think Nashville is a pretty good place, but a lot of their rumors have not been proven. Some have, and I've never seen them wrong before, but there's still a lot that they have been saying that we've yet to confirm. So we shall see. But what do you think? What do you make of enhanced backward compatibility on Switch 2? What do you make of this idea of the Switch 2 having colored buttons? And how about this bigger LCD screen and it having a 1080p resolution? Are you looking forward to this? Are you disappointed that it won't be OLED? Or are you thinking that this modern LCD screen will still hold up pretty well? And do you think this recent Bloomberg article further supports the idea that Switch 2 is indeed coming out in the year of 2024? Let me know what you think in the comments below. This is Andre's Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care.